Thank you very much. The next item of business is a debate on motion 23629 in the name of Jamie Green on responding to parliamentary will and calls for clarity in education. Can I invite members who wish to take part in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Jamie Green to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Debate time is short today, but there are several important points that I would like to raise with members. Can I also thank members from across the chamber who have engaged constructively on the substance of my motion today, and to that end we will be supporting the Labour amendment, and had it been selected I would have supported the Lib Dem amendment too. All points, valid points made in those amendments, which I hope to elaborate on myself. I think it's fair to say that this year has been nothing short, Presiding Officer, of an annus horribilis, to rehash that often quoted term. But for our teachers in Scotland, it has been an additionally stressful one. These are our key workers too, every day exposed to potential virus, just as others are. They do it, Presiding Officer, because they love teaching, and they feel the weight of that responsibility on their shoulders. On the 18th of November, this Parliament debated a Green Party motion about the realities of teaching on the ground during a health emergency. We heard numerous real-life anecdotes of teachers being encouraged not to self-isolate because of staffing pressures in their schools, and many clinically vulnerable teachers refused their requests to work from home. We collectively condemned that in this chamber. This Parliament voted on that motion, and we were clear and specific in our asks of the government. I supported it then, and today I hope to confirm and reconfirm that support on the record. But this time I do so in the hope that it will elicit a response from the government, because whilst these motions are non-binding, they are nevertheless important. The SNP government is often the first to talk about the will of Parliament, but it is oddly silent when it loses such votes. Let me turn to my own motion. The first point I'd like to make is that we reaffirm calls to recruit at least 2,000 additional teachers. And now that is more important than ever, given the newly expanded and comprehensive roles that teachers will play in replacing the job of exams. One teacher called me this morning and said, "I am a teacher, my job is to teach. Our workload is big enough as it is without this additional responsibility. Why are we doing the job of the SQA for them?" And he has a fair question to ask. Teacher workload is important because the well-being and mental health of our teachers and our school staff has often been forgotten in this debate. In fact, it's often taboo to talk about it. Increasing teacher numbers delivers three clear benefits. One, it can help reduce class sizes and the obvious benefits that brings. Two, it increases school resilience to deal with absences. And three, it helps increase subject choice. We know that this week, an FOI that we submitted shows that since 2014, average SQA course entries per pupil are down in 31 out of 32 local authorities. But the importance of teacher numbers is a principle we've already agreed in this Parliament, and to date, no definitive plan has emerged on how the government will honour that agreement. My motion goes on further to address the issue of free school meals. In my view, this is an issue of substance, and it is one which I am passionate about. Now, I accept that it's not always been the subject of consensus, either between parties or even within parties. In fact, it's often a heated and political topic. But I do want to be clear today, because when the First Minister announced this policy in her recent speech to SNP party conference, I welcomed it. Just as I welcomed it in a policy paper that these benches produced back in September, one that we debated in this very chamber, and just as I welcomed it in Labour's manifesto in 2019, other parties have done the same. To be honest with you, Presiding Officer, I couldn't care less whose idea it was first. Because what I do care about is that someone who grew up on free school meals, from primary right the way through secondary, I also know the stigma that was attached to it. I felt it, and I believe that we as a Parliament have an opportunity to end that stigma. And I think it would send a powerful message that if we as a Parliament on something as serious and important as this can park aside our differences and coalesce around the government's own policy. I've made my views on this policy clear, because sometimes lived experience does affect your politics. And it's not often you have the privilege in politics to introduce policy which is affected by your own life so much. So I do ask members in their contributions to reflect on that if and when they broach the subject. Now, the rest of my motion is a timely follow-up to yesterday's announcement by the Cabinet Secretary on the 2021 exams. And I believe that is the start of the conversation, not the end, because anybody who heard Dorothy McGuinty on the radio this morning will know the disquiet and the discomfort in the teaching community over the way this year has been handled. Now, the decision to cancel all exams, whatever your views on it, and mine are publicly known, seems to have raised more questions than it has answered. The Cabinet says that assessments will be based on teacher judgment. I applaud that, but questions do remain. For example, will prelims count where they are held? What about schools who don't hold prelims? Are they required, or mock exams? Is this new model a fair and level playing field? Is it fairer than exams? And if so, why? And how is it fairer than exams? These are questions that people are asking us, and these are questions I pose to the Cabinet Secretary. Because in abdicating assessment responsibility from SQA-led exams onto teachers, those teachers are concerned about their workload. A one-off payment announced by the Cabinet Secretary might compensate them financially, but it won't buy them more time. Next year, students will be starting university who have little or indeed no experience of sitting an exam, and that is a concern to many in the academic sector. One chemistry teacher told me yesterday, after the decision, students heading into university laboratories run the risk of serious danger where they have not yet gained the required knowledge and skills. He said it would be an abdication of responsibility to send students to university in the knowledge that they may not be ready. There are other questions on moderation. Teachers have been asked to use their judgment, but we know that this year their judgment was moderated, it was ignored, it was overturned, and then it was reinstated. It was a complete farce, Presiding Officer. So the big question is, if we value their judgment, will we value their judgment truly? Will their estimates be overruled again in the way they were this year? What moderation will take place? And how will the government ensure consistency and fairness in what is delivered? More importantly, what role will the SQA play in all of this? What about appeals in this new model? That is also equally unclear. The Priestley review was very specific. It wants enhancements to the appeal system, but we're yet to see the detail. How will they be fair, and how will we put young people at the heart of them? In closing, our motion calls for clarity on all of the above, Presiding Officer. I take no pleasure in saying that all the warning signs are there about next year. These are crucially important grades which allow our young people to move on in education and move on in life. The Education Secretary must not let history repeat itself. But it's not too late. Parliament can support our motion because we cannot let these young people down again. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. I call on John Swinney to speak to and move Amendment 23629.3.
Thank you, President Officer, and I move the amendment that stands in my name. Yesterday I outlined to Parliament that plans for the 2021 exams have been updated in light of the continuing disruption to young people's education caused by coronavirus. I highlighted that higher and advanced higher exams will not now go ahead, but will instead be awarded based on teacher judgment of evidence of learner attainment. The assessment model, details of which were published yesterday, will be based on the one already agreed for National 5 awards, although there will be adaptations for the higher and advanced higher requirements. That model has been developed by a group led by the SQA, but involving local authorities, professional associations, the college sector and Education Scotland to make sure that an important element that has to lie at the heart of answering almost all of the questions that Mr Green has raised in his contribution, that this approach is supported and endorsed by the whole education system and able to be delivered as a consequence of that agreement. Having taken that decision, we now provide certainty to the education system and also appropriate time to ensure that appropriate alternative processes can be implemented. This is the safest and fairest way to ensure that pupils' achievements are recognised in the difficult circumstances that we find ourselves in. The proposals recognise the reality of the disruption many pupils have already had to their learning, either through having to self-isolate, to learn from home, or as a result of school closures. It also recognises that whilst we hope the public health situation will improve, we cannot guarantee that there will be no further disruption to learning in the period that lies ahead. In coming to these decisions, there has been, as I mentioned, significant engagement with everyone involved, and following on from my announcement yesterday, I would like to reiterate our ongoing commitment to listening to the views of others to ensure that all decisions taken are as balanced and as fair as possible. In recognition of the additional workload of assessment of national qualifications in 2021, I am making provision for additional resource to meet the requirements of the new assessment approach. It's important that, as part of this exercise, adequate opportunity is available to ensure that early support to moderation practices within individual schools, so that as we work through the steps which are all outlined in the model published yesterday, there is adequate opportunity for members of the teaching profession to be engaged in dialogue and discussion about the standards that are expected in each of the qualifications, and to ensure that the assessment of the work undertaken by young people at local level, which will be structured around the assessment modules that are provided by the SQA, enables consistency of judgment to be applied in every part of the country. Of course.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the Cabinet Secretary giving way. Just in relation to this exceptional one-off payment, could the Cabinet Secretary outline where that will be sourced from? Is that coming from SQA fees or is that coming from general taxation?
Johnson.
Well, obviously it comes out of public expenditure, because all of these activities are paid for from public expenditure. But I make the point to Liz Smith that quite clearly we will not be paying marker fees in the SQA to the fashion that we would do normally, because there will not be exam papers to mark. So the resources that are allocated for that factor will be instrumental in making provision for the one-off payment, which is recognising the fact that teachers will be and lecturers will be undertaking a degree of activity that ordinarily would be carried out by SQA markers in this respect. The other point I have to counter about Mr Green's comments, which it was put to me on the radio this morning, that somehow assessment is not the business of teachers. I've never heard a more ridiculous remark in my life. Teachers are assessing the performance of pupils on a daily basis, and anyone that suggests that teachers are not involved in assessment knows absolutely nothing about the conduct of education in our society. Now, Presiding Officer, Mr Green made reference to the motion, the part of the motion that relates to the employment of full-time teachers. The Government has, of course, put in place £80 million of additional resources already, which has resulted in the recruitment of over 1,400 additional teachers and 246 support staff. This additional resource is bringing much-needed resilience to schools and the education system. I think Mr Mundell will have to forgive me. I've got to draw my remarks to a close. Decisions about school staffing rest with local authorities, and I continue to discuss their ongoing needs and aspirations around staff numbers in providing education during the COVID crisis. The Government has demonstrated over a number of years, and also very recently and without prompting, additional support for the provision of free school meals, with the allocation of an additional £37 million of funding to local authorities to continue the provision of free school meals during the period of schools being closed and in the summer, winter and Easter holidays. This is a fundamental commitment, and we have boosted that by indicating that if the Government is re-elected, we will by August 2022 expand the universal provision of free school meals and breakfast clubs to all primary school children, and this commitment would extend to all school holidays. That's what decisive leadership is about, to meet the needs of children and young people, and I'm proud of the Government's record in demonstrating that commitment.
Thank you. I now call on Ian Gray to speak to and move Amendment 23629.2.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to support the motion and move the amendment in my name. And let me start by paying tribute to the efforts of all school staff in keeping our schools going through this most difficult of terms. Pupils too, for their determination to keep learning whatever 2020 has thrown at them. And unfortunately, too often, what has been thrown at both teachers and pupils is critical decisions coming at the last minute and couched in confusion rather than clarity. This goes right back to March, where one day we were told schools would stay open and almost the next that they would close and learning had to go online overnight. Then, after weeks of preparation for socially distanced blended learning, we were told just before the summer holidays that schools would open full-time. There was, of course, the SQA fiasco when ministers went to the barricades to defend downgraded results until they were forced by pupil protest to respect teacher assessments. Teachers were told classes would be socially distanced, then that they could not be. Pupils were told not to wear face coverings, then they were told that they must. So no wonder then that teachers have felt increasingly ill-used, culminating in ministers dealing shambolically with a modest request for a slightly early end to face-to-face teaching before Christmas, ministers wrapping that up with a January holiday extension and then ditching the whole thing at the last minute. Incredibly, the EIS are now saying that teachers in England have been better treated by the Tories than ours have by the Scottish Government. These difficult decisions, of course, are unavoidable in the face of the pandemic, but their mishandling is not inevitable if ministers did really listen, as the Deputy First Minister claims he does. The poet Alexander Scott once satirised Scottish education of the last century in this way: I tell you, well, Parliament is entitled to say to the Education Secretary, we tell you. We tell them over and over that downgrading SQA awards on the basis of school performance, not pupil achievement, would be a disaster. We tell them that he had to decide on exams long before now, or teachers would tell him it's too late, as they are. And only last month, Parliament explicitly told him in that Green motion that teachers had to see enhanced measures that allay their safety fears. But he has not listened. There are no more additional teachers beyond those he was claiming a month ago when we had that debate, so no smaller classes. There is no funding for improved ventilation, so schools are still sitting with the windows open. And there is no more routine testing until yesterday, when he said he was going to get round to speaking to some local authorities about having a pilot next year, suggesting that we might have invented, produced and delivered a vaccine all before teachers can get routine tests. Many of these decisions have been the right ones, but, Presiding Officer, too many have been right decisions taken way too late or only after another handbrake turn, which is why we need those additional staff and routine staff testing now, not sometime in the future. And it is why we must get the 2021 award scheme right. And that can only happen if the whole scheme of moderation and validation is published urgently and with complete transparency. We cannot have last year's mistakes repeated again, when the SQA only published its moderation scheme on the day the results came out and all hell broke loose. We are saying to the Cabinet Secretary, listen now, and please, let's get this right this time.
Thank you. I now call on Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Jamie Green for ensuring we have this time to debate the broad range of serious and interrelated issues that are facing our schools this term. As Mr Green's motion states, Parliament set clear expectations of the Government when we passed my Safe Schools motion, as well as Conservative and Labour amendments nearly a month ago. It's disappointing that this debate is even necessary, but it is. On the 18th of November, Parliament called for vulnerable school staff to be supported to work from home or in a safer alternative setting. We called for a further 2,000 teachers to provide cover over the winter and ease the crippling workload pressures currently faced. And we called for regular testing to be made available for all staff and for senior pupils. The one area in which I see some progress is on testing, with the recent announcement of an asymptomatic testing pilot. But we're 9 months into this pandemic, so another pilot frankly feels like a delay. I'd appreciate if the Cabinet Secretary could outline why a further pilot is necessary, given the wealth of evidence we now have from across the world and from mass testing programmes already in place here, such as what's currently happening with university students and the pilot in Johnston. I'd further appreciate if he could confirm when this pilot will take place, when it will start and end, and when the mass asymptomatic testing in all schools that Parliament voted for will actually be delivered. Given the near certainty of a post-Christmas surge, I'm not the only one who believes this should be in place for every school in January. I'm aware that some discussions have taken place on the issue of protecting vulnerable school staff, but beyond the effective advocacy of unions in individual cases and in some cases at local authority level, No solution is in place. A postcode lottery on a fundamental issue of health and safety still exists. And many extremely vulnerable teachers whose employers did make changes whilst their areas were in level 4 are wondering today whether those protections will be maintained in level 3. The Education Secretary said that no teacher should be pressured into class against the advice of their GP. But he knows that is exactly what's happening. So again, we're asking for him to intervene. On the recruitment of additional teachers, I can see no progress, as Ian Gray has just mentioned. High staff absence rates will continue well into the new year, and to say that teachers are at breaking point would be an understatement. But today's budget update made no mention of additional funds for teacher recruitment, so we can only presume the government is not going to do what Parliament has instructed. I hope the Cabinet Secretary will address these points, but time is tight, and Mr Green's motion also makes reference to the critical issue of next year's exams, so I want to address that as well. The Greens are of course glad the government's finally made the decision to cancel and replace hires and advanced hires. We've called for this since May and have been contacted by increasing numbers of young people anxious about having had to miss weeks of school due to self-isolation. They didn't know how they were going to manage exams compared to those fortunate enough to avoid absences. But in leaving this decision so late, the government has caused some entirely unnecessary stress for pupils and particularly for their teachers. When the decision was taken on National Fives, the Cabinet Secretary categorically assured me it should not increase teacher workload. He did so again yesterday when I made the same point in relation to hires and advanced hires. But if he genuinely believes this to be the case, he needs to explain why not a single teacher seems to agree with him. Because the reality is that exams have essentially been replaced in large part by de facto exams to be administered and marked by teachers. Pre-pandemic, Scotland schools were dependent on the average of 11 hours overtime worked each week by teachers. That's only increased this year, and with this assessment model, it will increase further. It will take many beyond their breaking point, and it is simply not sustainable. Parliament has already given the government clear instructions. We are now set to do so again. If they do not act, it will not just be Parliament, but teachers, pupils and parents who will hold them responsible next year. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call on Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start by acknowledging and thanking pupils, parents and carers, teachers and all school staff for their hard work, especially during this pandemic. And I also note it's just 3 weeks since many of these issues were last debated by this Parliament. Many working in Scottish education can feel their patience with the Scottish Government wearing thin. It's been a long and trying year, but it has felt all the longer and all the more trying because teachers, staff and pupils have been at the mercy of a government paralysed by indecision. Yesterday's announcement followed the pattern that we are all now very familiar with, a decision made on exams, but only after another damaging delay. While the government was slowly pondering, teachers, parents and pupils go through real and legitimate anxieties about their work and their futures. Cancelling exams was the right thing to do, and it was inevitable. The evidence is clear that pupils wouldn't have had an equal shot at success if they went ahead. Pupils attending school in Glasgow have had a very different experience compared to those in the Highlands ever since schools returned. It's difficult to see how there could ever have been a level playing field for hires and advanced hires. The Liberal Democrat Education Minister in Wales made the decision weeks ago, and yet almost the autumn term passed with pupils being asked to shield and learn from home in level 4 areas, at the same time as those elsewhere in the country still attend as normal. Once again, it took political intervention by the Scottish Liberal Democrats and others for the Scottish Government to find their way to a conclusion. These are difficult times, and I do not underestimate the challenge in making these decisions. But there are real people at the other end of these announcements. The EIS reported unsustainable workloads for school management teams in September as they grappled with change after change, all while trying to give their pupils the best education possible. It's safe to say that things haven't improved since then. Presiding Officer, I am seriously concerned about the health and well-being of those who are on the front line in Scottish schools. And I don't understand why the Scottish Government refused to acknowledge the valid concerns that have been raised by vulnerable teachers. The Education Secretary has proposed another amendment that removes all reference to them. The Scottish Government needs to take concrete action, and make decisions made in anticipation of the problems coming down the line, not on reflection afterwards. Schools need to have the detail of the new exam model for Highers and Advanced Highers in their inboxes by the time they return after Christmas. That means detail on how and when pupils should be assessed, how results might be moderated, and what support will be offered to those who have already been impacted by the virus. Vulnerable teachers need to be offered a safe place to work, so nobody is left feeling unsafe. Additional school staff need to be recruited and ready to deal with the new problems that arise in the new year. The patchwork hiring that has been reported so far, with 9 local authority areas adding no new additional support staff, is not good enough. And issues like free school meals, as Jamie Green eloquently highlighted, need to stop being treated like political hot potatoes. And there needs to be an interim report from the OECD so that people in Scotland have the chance to reflect fairly on the state of education ahead of the next election. We will be supporting the motion and Labour's amendment, but not the government amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I'd encourage members please to stick to your 4 minutes in order that everyone can be heard. And I call on Elaine Smith to be followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I declare my membership of the General Teaching Council? I want to start by thanking teachers and everyone who works in their schools for supporting our young people in formal education during these difficult times. And we should also recognise that staff and pupils are under great pressure and that pupils in poorer areas are affected more by absence rates. Many pupils have been off isolating several times, and this will undoubtedly have an impact on their education, alongside the pressures, worries and social impact of the pandemic having a detrimental effect on mental health and well-being. So it is important that there is certainty about the exams this academic year and that full details following the announcement of the cancellations yesterday are published. Teachers also need clarity on what is expected of them, and young people must be treated fairly with their personal circumstances taken into account to ensure that they get the results that they deserve this year. In the previous debate a few weeks ago, we heard concerns expressed about the safety of schools, the transmission rates and the pressures on staff to go to work. It is difficult to comprehend that due to concerns about transmission rates, we can't socialise in our homes, we can only meet one other household outside, but a teacher can mix inside with 30 young people from 30 different households. So it's vitally important, because of that, that all of the safety measures and improvements voted for by Parliament are implemented. And the announcement of routine asymptomatic testing of school staff is welcome, but it isn't happening soon enough. And there is also undoubtedly a case for teachers to be offered the COVID vaccine as soon as possible, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary can comment on that in the summing up. I want to concentrate now on the issue of free school meals, which is included in the motion. As the Cabinet Secretary and others in the Chamber will know, I've been a long-time campaigner on this issue, and I co-sponsored Francis Curran MSP's Free School Meals Bill in Session 2. The original campaign was supported by a wide range of organisations, including the STUC Women's Committee and Child Poverty Action Group, who produced a campaign book entitled Even the Tatties Have Batter. This was taken from a comment made by a pupil about the standards of school dinners, and it referred to the appalling type of meals on offer, including the infamous turkey twizzlers. This was allowed due to a Tory government then getting rid of nutritional standards for school meals and removing price controls, which permitted private firms under CCT to charge a fortune for junk food. And currently, we see footballer Marcus Rashford campaigning on school meals, but then it was Jamie Oliver who was demanding better quality food and a ban on turkey twizzlers. And of course, the then government, which was a Scottish Labour-led government, introduced nutritional standards in our schools through the Hungry for Success policy. In 2007, the SNP came into government with a promise to introduce free school meals, beginning with our youngest children. But it was only when the Tories at Westminster introduced free school meals for P1 to 3 in 2014 that the SNP government then used the Barnett consequentials to do the same here in 2015. Personally, I've got no doubt that free nutritious school meals are necessary not only to tackle poverty and hunger, but also in terms of nourishment and overall health and well-being. But unfortunately, too many of our children remain at risk of being overweight or obese, around 30%. And despite the government pledge to halve that by 2030, little progress has been made. I think we could engage children with healthy eating by tapping into the fact that many have been inspired by environmental campaigning, so food-related environmental factors could be promoted to encourage healthy eating and the uptake of free school meals. However, we need to be sure that schools have the facilities to accommodate children for the meals. And I have to say that councils have suffered severe cuts to their budgets over the years, so it's essential that the Scottish Government fully compensates for expenditure on free school meals to ensure that other educational services such as learning support do not suffer. Presiding Officer, we're living in a society with high levels of food insecurity, children going hungry and families increasingly dependent on food banks, and there are predictions for further increase in demand for food banks due to the pandemic and resultant unemployment and increasing poverty, which is why my proposal for a right to food is so important. I'll end on this. It's 13 years since the SNP promised to roll out free school meals, and many children have lost out without having access to them during that time. So unless this latest promise is really just election propaganda, then it really is time to act now and fully deliver on the 2007 promise. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Whittle, to be followed by Claire Abbott.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start by drawing the Parliament's attention to the fact I have a daughter who's head of department in a secondary school, as well as a youngest who's just started secondary school. I am glad to have the opportunity to speak in this debate on education. And I think it's a subject not debated enough in this chamber, to my mind, and far too often it is the opposition that forces the government to face up to the responsibilities in what is a devolved portfolio. But let's start where there is a consensus. I am always delighted when the Scottish Conservative announced they would put forward a policy commitment to provide free school lunches for all primary schools. I think, as you know, Deputy Presiding Officer, I've always stated that I thought education was the solution to health and welfare, and from my health brief, ensuring access to nutritious quality food is an essential element of academic attainment, as well as good physical and mental health. And I say this, of course, as the attainment gap and inequalities continue to grow. It was therefore welcome, of course, that the SNP have decided to follow a similar path, and with Labour having a like-minded policy in their last manifesto, it would seem that agreement has broken out across the chamber. I would also note here that I think it would be helpful if local public food procurement were adopted in tandem with this policy. Perhaps then we could also make a positive impact on the rural economy, as well as the environmental issues that are often within this chamber. However, Deputy Presiding Officer, I want to focus the remainder of my time in this speech to the mental health and well-being of our teachers and staff, and the increasing pressure that's being heaped upon them by the issues Jamie Green addressed in the Scottish Conservative motion. There is a lack of teachers. We're calling for some 2,000 at the moment, and we're short, and it's now exacerbated, of course, by the forced absentees from classroom of many of our teaching staff by the COVID pandemic. We cannot ignore the pressure that teachers were under pre-COVID. The piles of paperwork and the tick-box exercises that have continued to creep into their daily work. And I've always advocated that teachers are trained to teach, and the system should be such that they are allowed to get on with the job they're trained for and that they feel so passionately about. And creating that positive working environment speaks directly to recruitment and to retention of staff. And having to spend an increasing chunks of their day on paperwork not only impinges on their ability and desire to teach, it also discourages teachers from potentially getting involved with other extracurricular activities. I just thought I'd slide that in there, Deputy Presiding Officer, because it's another one of my consistent calls. However, COVID has raised the health and well-being issue to the top of the agenda. A teacher recently told me of a huge rise in pupils reporting with mental health and anxiety issues, and that they did not have the resources to deal with this. And in their words, teachers are concerned with the potential to miss something that may lead to a tragedy further down the line. Surely that is too much pressure and stress for teachers to have to cope with over and above their day-to-day pressures. Last week we debated the mental health support for children, and there was a general agreement that enough is not being done, especially in the current climate. However, that must have a knock-on effect to those charged with looking after our children within the education system. The pressures of exams or assessment processes, the uncertainty that feeds the pupils' anxieties, and the inability of teachers to prepare for those eventualities because of a lack of guidance and clarity from the Scottish Government is obviously going to affect morale. And remember, Deputy Presiding Officer, we're in December, nearly into a new year, just a few short months from when these assessments and exams would have been timetabled. And I just don't think the Scottish Government are giving our teachers the resource or sufficient time to properly plan. Deputy Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government's report card on education was poor pre-COVID. The current crisis has highlighted their inability to take anything like the decisive action we should expect from our government. And I have to say, I think our teachers, school staff and pupils deserve better. Deputy Presiding Officer.
I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Alison Hatton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 2020 will be a year where we reflect that wisdom and knowledge changed on a daily, sometimes hourly basis as the COVID crisis progressed. Some things, some wisdom, some knowledge has got old and outdated very quickly. And the Conservative motion today is an example. It has not aged well. With regards to exams, the DFM has announced, the Deputy First Minister has announced that National 5, Higher and Advanced Higher exams in 2021 will be replaced by alternative certification models and measures will be in place to address teacher workload. Clarity now given. With regards to teacher numbers, the Scottish Government has taken action to help schools respond to the challenges of COVID with an additional investment of £135 million, which includes the recruitment of more than 1,400 additional teachers. Clarity now given on teacher numbers. And can I remind the Chamber it was the SNP who had to incentivise maintaining teacher numbers in 2015. The then Finance Secretary John Swinney maintained teacher numbers with a pupil-teacher ratio by giving £51 million of a funding package to local authorities. And with regards to free school meals, the Scottish Tory MPs famously voted against extending free school meals to summer holidays in the Commons only last month. And despite Douglas Ross publicly backing the plan, he didn't turn up to the Commons for that vote. Meanwhile, the SNP government has delivered its free school meals and is committed to further £100 payment for those in receipt of free school meals to help families deal with the pressures of COVID. To my Conservative colleagues, that's the difference between a sound bite and a real bite of food for hungry Wains delivered by the SNP. Presiding Officer, the weight of expectation from our young people, parents, carers and our educators and local and national bodies is immense. And no matter the decisions taken, we should be mindful that some will be disappointed and anxious and worried, and especially on how this crisis may impact the outcomes for our young people. And we should thank everyone for their resilience and for their patience. But there are no winners or losers at these times. And to couch this debate in the retrospection of "we told you so" really adds nothing, because we should all be looking to the road ahead, the challenges we still face as a community, and to those outcomes for our young people, which should be everyone's focus. Education has to be delivered safely, equitably, to ensure our young people, parents, carers, our educators, our local and national bodies and the wider community of Scotland, including employers, have confidence in the grades awarded this year. All those involved in delivering Scottish education have faced extremely difficult circumstances. The Deputy First Minister has announced that National 5 and Higher and Advanced Higher exams will be replaced by an alternative certification model, and that measures will be in place to address teacher workload. The assessment needs to be fair, and we know, and has already been mentioned, almost 40% of those who are not in school for more than 1/5 of the school openings for a COVID-related reason in S4 are from our poorest communities. It's been unavoidable that COVID has disrupted learning, and it's impossible to guarantee that all learners will be in a position to have their best chance for performing in a true potential exams. And that's why cancelling the exams this year has been the right decision, and we should be overall concerned for the well-being of our young people and of our teachers, and get behind our school communities as they, like we all do, continue to face the challenges of COVID. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by George Adam. My profound apologies. I call Alison Harris to be followed by Rona Mackay. Getting ahead of myself.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. No one's under any illusion that running an education system in the middle of a global pandemic isn't exactly easy. All across Europe, governments have been forced to take unpopular and unprecedented decisions in relation to schools, universities and early years. And no one is seriously suggesting that those decisions have been taken with anything other than the best of intentions, even if decisions themselves sometimes divide opinion. So that gives the Scottish Government some cover for the past 9 months. Finding adequate excuses for failings in education amassed over the last 13 years will be trickier. As have been well documented today by colleagues across the Chamber, the SNP's domestic record when it comes to education has been shocking. Unfortunately, the chaos caused by the Government's indecision on higher and advanced higher exams have left pupils and teachers in a situation of uncertainty since the beginning of this session, having to second-guess whether exams will take place in 2021 or not. Even with the severity of the challenges posed by COVID-19, surely there has been enough time for any government to decide on and act a proper plan. This should have all been done and prepared months ago and not announced yesterday, more than halfway through the academic school year. Whatever decision the SNP government wanted to reach, it waited far too long to make it. So now, where are we? John Swinney's response yesterday is to issue guidance on how teachers should assess their pupils, recognising, of course, that this will create additional work and pressure on our already overstretched teachers. So by way of an acknowledgement, we'll give teachers and lecturers who are critical to assessing and marking the exam courses a one-off payment. How much extra pressure and time for teachers will this be? You'll have to forgive me, I've only got 4 minutes, sorry. And what about this additional payment? How much will that be? And of course, let's note this will be taxable. Hires aren't just about the year leading up to the actual exam. They are the culmination of years of hard work for both students and teachers alike. And for John Swinney to suggest, and I quote, that he will not stake the future of our higher pupils on a lottery of whether their school was hit by COVID. Sorry, now it will be a complete lottery. And if 2020 assessment the assessment process is anything to go by, a complete shambles too, especially in light of guidance only now being issued to teachers on how to assess their pupils, rather than every pupil sitting the same exam on the same day across Scotland. I have touched on the additional pressure that will now be heaped onto teachers, but what about our pupils? They are now living under huge pressure at school, being constantly assessed as opposed to aiming for a higher exam next May. This is affecting the mental health of our pupils and should be flagged as an area of major concern. And let's think what will happen when this generation of young Scottish people go to university or college and suddenly have to sit an exam, when for the past 2 years that opportunity has been taken away. It will leave them ill-equipped and at a disadvantage because some children will have had no exam experience under their belt. As we all know, the First Minister requested that the people of Scotland judge her on her record on education. But given the performance of the last 13 years, it's perhaps unsurprising to see the SNP government now so averse to examinations. I'm pleased to support the motion in the name of Jamie Green.
Thank you very much. I now call Rona Mackay to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Conservative motion we're debating today has many asks and appears to be a composite of many issues, some of which, as has been said, have been superseded by yesterday's announcement from the Cabinet Secretary. However, I'll try to address most of the points raised in the motion. On safe schools, the safety of pupils, teachers and all school staff has been paramount in the Government's approach to dealing with the pandemic. Arrangements are already in place in conjunction with COSLA to allow members of school staff to get a coronavirus test, whether or not they have symptoms, and we're currently the only part of the UK that provides this routine access.
In addition, when schools return in January, we will begin piloting routine asymptomatic testing of school staff. Teachers and all school staff should not feel they're at risk simply by doing their jobs. Presiding Officer, the call from the Conservatives to bring forward free school lunches and breakfasts to all primary pupils from the start of the next financial year is, in my view, pretty breathtaking. I acknowledge Jamie Green's personal view in this, but it is in their motion. I wouldn't have thought the Tories needed reminding that it was their Westminster government who had to be shamed into giving free meals to pupils during the school holidays by a Premier League footballer. So it's a bit rich to call on us to bring forward our own groundbreaking initiative. That, coupled with the news from the Roundtree Foundation that more than 500,000 children across the UK are living in poverty due to Westminster failings, really compound the extraordinary part of this motion. The question of the 2021 higher exam diet request was answered in full yesterday by the Education Secretary. National 5's higher and advanced higher exams in 2021 will be replaced by alternative certification models, and measures will be in place to address increased teacher and lecturer workload. They will rightfully receive a one-off payment for the extra work in assessing and marking exam courses this year, a process which I'm confident will be carried out professionally and efficiently. I'm glad that comprehensive guidance on the process will be given, but it is important that the Government responds quickly to any difficulties that may arise, given the importance of these assessments to the future of our children. Presiding Officer, I believe cancelling exams is a sensible and logical decision, given the disruption the virus has caused to learning this year. Many pupils have lost significant learning time through the lockdown or self-isolation, and evidence shows that it's affected pupils from most disadvantaged backgrounds disproportionately. It's vital that they are not further disadvantaged. A teacher-based assessment of individual learner attainment may offer a better approach to delivering fairness, especially when supported by an exceptional circumstances process and an appeals process. And I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary has confirmed that no algorithms will be used in this process. Presiding Officer, all those involved in delivering Scottish education have this year faced a monumental task. There have been no easy solutions to the issues faced over the last 9 months and the challenges that lay ahead. Facing this reality, the Scottish Government has taken action to help schools respond to the challenges of COVID with an additional investment of £135 million, which includes the recruitment of more than 1,400 additional teachers. And the £50 million Education Recovery Fund for councils to deal with additional staffing requirements and support cleaning, facilities management, transport and other issues is critical to ensuring a safe return to schools, and it's absolutely vital. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we are living in unprecedented times and having to take unheard of decisions, but I'm confident that the Government has made young people and our valued teaching staff an absolute priority during this pandemic. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
The last speaker in the open debate is George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I don't doubt any of my colleagues in this Chamber's commitment to education in Scotland. I don't doubt that they want the best for the young people involved and all that, but I think sometimes in a debate like this we have to acknowledge and take a deep breath and say we're living in unprecedented times. It's been very difficult for everyone to know what's going from day to day, let alone be able to plan and make sure we've got everything right in education all the time, every single day. And one of the things I have to say is that I've got to welcome the work done by our teachers and pupils to try and continue down their educational path. But I think we've got to find a way to make it everything safe for them and for the pupils so they can build for their futures. And Presiding Officer, many colleagues come to this chamber and they say they welcome the debate they're talking in, and you know it's a bit of a cliche like many others that we use. But I welcome it from the point of view that the Deputy First Minister has already actually brought forward many of the issues that the Tories have got in their motion. You know, yes, there's many other challenges out there for us all, and there's things that we need to address. But recently, the Deputy First Minister announced that exams would be replaced by alternative certification models, and is addressing teacher workload issue as well, which is just two of the Tory wants in their motion. And the fact that the Scottish Government has taken action to help schools respond to many challenges of COVID-19 in education, this is helped, and other colleagues have said this as well, by the £135 million, which includes the recruitment of 1,400 additional teachers. I would love to, but honestly, when we have these speed dating debates, it's quite difficult to take time at that point. But it is extremely strange to read in the motion that the Conservative Party are new recruits to all forms of free school meals. And, Presiding Officer, I'm always one to actually encourage new recruits on an issue as important as this. But it was not long ago that the Scottish Tory leader made a similar commitment, and then he didn't even bother to turn up for the vote. Now, don't think for a minute that I think some of my colleagues' words, they mean it and everything else, but at the end of the day, your leader didn't even bother to turn up for the vote on extending free school meals during summer. And despite publicly, I've really not got the time, despite publicly backing it, Presiding Officer, many years ago, I sold cars, and car salespeople have a reputation that is meant to be a solid reputation because of the industry we work in. I don't know one car salesperson that would have had the ideas that Douglas Ross had, say one thing and deliver something completely different. I would never have known that anybody in an industry, even that the public have a negative perception of, to do anything like that. But that's the Tories for you. They just can't help themselves. And last night I watched a young man on TV, a school pupil, saying that he welcomed John Swinney's announcements yesterday because he said it took the pressure off of him and his colleagues and gave them an opportunity to actually concentrate because they were dealing with the challenges of COVID, gave them the opportunity to actually make sure that they could get on with their education. And the EIS said something very similar as well at that point. And that's the interesting thing. I think that's why all our colleagues here sometimes need to take a deep breath and just understand what's actually happening out there in the real world and get on with the issues and deliver for the people of Scotland. And in closing, Presiding Officer, you know, one day this will all be over. This will all be history. This will all be in the annals. It will be something we'll tell our grandchildren about. But when that day does come, we have to ensure that we have given our pupils in the education the opportunity that they need so that when they can go forward and get on with the rest of their life.
We move to the closing speeches, and I call on Daniel Johnson, please, for up to 4 minutes. Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In his remarks there, George Adam asked us to take a deep breath. I would ask members on the SNP benches to consider this. I think it's they that need to take a deep breath, because in essence there is nothing in this motion or the amendments proposed by the Labour Party that they should disagree with. And indeed, if we all are agreed that we want to see our education system succeed, these shouldn't be points of disagreement. They should be points of consensus about how we take our education system forward. Because, as many members have pointed out, we are in unprecedented times. As we face COVID-19, it presents challenges both in terms of the immediate infection control, but how we deal with those things given the limited information and the fact that this is an emerging issue and an emerging virus without the science to back it up. And we grapple with the long-term social and economic consequences. And the education policy in microcosm has each and every one of those three elements. And it is not easy. And it's understandable that mistakes would be made because of those unprecedented circumstances. But we are, as many members have also pointed out, 9 months on. And we have seen a great number of issues arise, as Ian Gray set out in his opening remarks. And what we're asking for is for the Scottish Government to learn from those mistakes. When the exams were cancelled back in May, it should have been clear and obvious that there was the very real risk that the exams in 2021 too would have to be cancelled. And from that moment, it was incumbent on the government to draw up plans in contingency with regard to what they would do if those exams had to be cancelled again. But that is not the announcement we have just had. The announcement we have just had should have been that we are reverting to Plan B, a Plan B that was well understood and had been announced at the start of this term, as opposed to being half announced as schools get ready to rise for Christmas. Which brings us to the motions we have in front of us. And again, as George Adam seemed to rather confusingly point out, the government is apparently in agreement with each of the points raised in the motion, but is opposing them because of who is raising them. They're voting against more teachers, despite claiming that they're putting more teachers in place, and despite acknowledging the increased workload that we're placing on our teachers. They claim that the government is providing clarity, and yet will vote against calls for clarity. And on free school meals, I agree with many SNP members. The Conservatives have been on something of an ironic journey on this issue, but let me say this. I don't care the journey that someone has been on. If they arrive at the right conclusion, if they agree on an important issue, such as free school meals, as well as, which is a case as well made as it was by Elaine Smith, I congratulate them for arriving at the right conclusion. I don't dismiss their calls because I don't agree with where they started. And on the Labour amendment, we call for clarity. Now, it's claimed that we have had an announcement on the methodology, but I would say this. We have a timetable, we have a framework, but what we do not have is clarity about how that quality control, that quality assessment will take place. And we do not know how appeals will take place. Indeed, if you click through the documentation on the SQA website, you are taken through to a document which states that appeals will be done on a centre basis, not on individuals. There are two clear lessons from the debacle earlier this year in exams. First of all, candidates need to know that when their grades are altered, they need to know the basis of that alteration, why it has happened, and what the justification is. The framework I set out does not provide that clarity, and it will not be sufficient until it does so. But secondly, when they do feel that their grade is unfair, they need to be the person who decides whether to appeal, not their schools. So, and let me close on this. These are unprecedented times, but we must learn from the mistakes, not repeat them, because the future of our young people rests on the decisions that we make. Thank you.
I call John Swinney. 5 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me address some of the points that have been raised by members in the debate. First of all, Ross Greer and Beatrice Wishart both raised issues in relation to the position of vulnerable teachers, and I have placed on the record, and indeed it's implicit in the guidance that the Government has issued on this particular issue, that the individual assessments must be made by employers who are local authorities. The Government does not employ teachers. Individual local authorities must make those assessments about the clinical circumstances of individual teachers. And as Parliament has said in the past, and which the Government has agreed with, teachers who are judged to be clinically vulnerable should be deployed on other duties to enable them to preserve their health and well-being, which is central to the assessment and the duty of employment that rests on individual local authorities. Now, Elaine Smith raised a number of points in relation to testing, as did Ross Greer. And I think it has to be put on the record, didn't sound particularly obvious from listening to some contributions to the debate, that asymptomatic testing is actually available for teachers just now. This is the only part of the United Kingdom that makes that available to teachers today. If a teacher is worried, they can get a test about their circumstances, even if they have no symptoms. That's not available anywhere else in the United Kingdom. But there's no acknowledgement of that in the points put forward in the debate today. Now, Elaine Smith made a point about the prioritisation for the vaccine. The Government and the Health Secretary has been quite clear on this, and the Cabinet has agreed this. We've taken our clinical advice from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. If we are to take a different stance from that, that invites us to just ditch clinical advice. Now, I don't think Parliament would particularly forgive us if we ditched clinical advice that's available to us. I'll give way to Mr Green. Yeah.
Jamie Green.
It's a simple question. If we can offer lateral flow tests to students to get them home for Christmas, why can't we do the same for teachers?
Because lateral flow devices cannot be administered without clinical supervision, which means that we would have to put that clinical supervision into every single school in the country and also have sufficient lateral flow devices to enable that to be the case. Now, we've allocated supplies to students to directly address the issues that arose out of the spread of the virus, and we've put clinical supervision into the delivery of those lateral flow devices. That is the fundamental difference. This has been done in 19 institutions in the country. For Mr Greer's benefit, we have 2,500 schools in the country. It is a substantially different proposition that's got to be put in place. Now, the third point, I'll move on to the exams now. And Ross Greer raised the point that the exams were being potentially replaced by de facto exams because of prelims. I want to completely debunk that point of view. That is not what is in the guidance that is set out. I do not believe that it is necessary for young people to sit a mid-term exam to replace the end-of-year exam. That is not what this is about. This is about holistic assessment, relying on the judgment of teachers to enable, as Elaine Smith correctly said, the personal experiences of individual young people and their access to education to be taken into account. Now, Alison Harris made a point of concern about the mental health of young people in our schools, and I am concerned about the mental health of young people in our schools. I do not believe that the solution to that is to position young people, with all the worries they've got just now, to wait for an end-of-year exam when we could support them in developing their learning during the year to make sure that they were equipped properly to be able to have command of the curriculum and to be entitled to awards. And if Alison Harris thinks that young people's mental health is better served by waiting till one afternoon in May as one opportunity for young people to be supported in these current circumstances, that's a view that I disagree with, and Parliament is entitled to hear honest disagreement between members of Parliament, and you're hearing it now from the Education Secretary on that point. When we then come to the question about the timing of exam decisions, and of course there has been criticism of the timing of my decision yesterday, but I equally would point out to Parliament that various people, particularly members over on those benches, were arguing very vociferously with me that I shouldn't take any premature decisions. I appreciate that's maybe not the case everywhere in the Chamber, but I was being argued against taking premature decisions. And now we find ourselves in a situation where when I take a decision, it's judged to be a delayed decision, when the self-same people were arguing such a decision would be a premature decision. I think what that stinks of is total and utter rank hypocrisy, which we've heard a lot of this afternoon. Now, the final point I want to make is in relation to some of the practical contents of the motion that we have in front of us. Because there are two particular provisions which I am entirely supportive of expanding the number of teachers, and we have done that, and of expanding the provision for free school meals, and we have done that, and we continue to do it, and we don't need to be shamed into action by successful footballers to do that, because we took the decisions to enable that to be the case. But Parliament also has got to give consideration to the practical implementation of all of these measures. And that's why Parliament has got to be careful about the motions that it passes, because it has to be able to put in place the financial and operational support to make sure they can be delivered on the ground.
Now call Oliver Mundell to wind up this debate for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll start with a note of consensus after that kind of grumpy, angry, dismissive speech that has become John Swinney's trademark when it comes to education. But in seriousness, I want to join other members in thanking our teachers, our pupils, all the support staff, parents, carers across the country who've had to work doubly hard through this pandemic as a result of John Swinney's failures. So, today's debate has provided an important chance to take stock of the government's performance and progress.
Can we stop for a moment? Please sit
Certainly.
down, please, Mr Mundell. I've spent the last 10 minutes listening to shouting from this side of the chamber. Now I'm getting it from this side of the chamber. So could we all just calm down and start having a bit of respect for each other, please? Mr Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think that COVID has revealed where education truly sits in this government's priority list, and it's not at the top. It's hard to call it their so-called number one priority, let alone a priority at all, because with every debate, every parliamentary statement and every passing day, it becomes clear that the SNP and John Swinney are content to preside over an underperforming education system. and continue to refuse to listen to the will of this Parliament. But worse than that, they refuse to listen to our teachers working on the front line. Far from equity and excellence, all we see is dither and delay, and a blame culture that sees responsibility lie with everyone other than the Scottish Government. As we saw yesterday, even the most basic questions seem difficult to answer. The never-ending U-turns are becoming more like a loop-to-loop, and I'm not surprised that even the Cabinet Secretary is finding it hard to keep up with himself. Ian Gray is right. Often we see the right decisions, but they do come far too late. And usually at this point in the debate, I would say that this government's too busy focusing on a divisive independence referendum. But, Presiding Officer, I'm honestly not sure if John Swinney is more preoccupied with burying the legal advice that this Parliament has been asking for. Anyway, all we can know for sure is that education has fallen even lower down the priority list in these past few months. No new ideas of their own, no new thinking, no real commitment, no willingness to engage with Parliament, no willingness to engage with teachers, unions. It's all just talk. And that's why I find it pretty galling to hear SNP backbench MSPs come to this chamber and suggest that after 13 long years in government, it's just a total coincidence, just a total and complete coincidence that increasing school meal provision to all primary school pupils has come about just a matter of weeks after the Scottish Conservatives called for this change to be made. And, Presiding Officer, what's even more ridiculous is that SNP MSPs only seem to care or be interested in what's happening in England when there's an opportunity for political point scoring. And I think that, if we're going to talk about politicking, if we're going to suggest that people are being shameful, I think that is shameful. Where is their concern for the rest of the UK when they're seeking to tear our country apart? As our motion states, let's bring forward the plans now. Let's deliver on this change. Let's take the politics out of it. Let's get it done before the election. Let's make the change at the start of the next financial year. If we all agree that it's a good idea, why wait? Picking up another point made by my colleague Jamie Green, again, I'm unclear why this SNP government, having accepted that it was a mistake to cut our teacher numbers to the bone, has been so sluggish about putting in place plans to deliver additional teachers. Where are the additional 2,000 additional full-time teachers that we need to fill vacancies? The pressure and workload on teachers in our schools would be much less, and there would be much more resilience in the system if those teachers were on the front line helping our young people. How can a government that's serious about maximising opportunities for Scotland's young people be so relaxed about such a significant failing? Is the Cabinet Secretary happy that young people, particularly those living in rural and remote communities, are getting a second-class education service because the teachers simply aren't there to give them the teaching and support they deserve? I'm certainly not happy, and I know that my constituents feel this government lacks an understanding of what's needed to turn things around. They certainly lack the prioritisation when it comes to delivering more teachers. Of course, those teachers who are there are working very, very hard, and I would never seek to do down our young people or our schools, but they should not have to pick up the slack as a result of national failings in policy and a lack of resources. It would be tempting to say that many of these changes have come about as a result of an urban, central belt-dominated mindset at the heart of the SNP. But the reality is, things are no better in our cities, and our young people are being let down the length and breadth of the country. As I close, Presiding Officer, I want to focus briefly, as a number of other members have, by highlighting the many questions that have come as a result of the Deputy First Minister's statement yesterday. Surely, having had the advantage of significant practice when it comes to announcing U-turns and changes in policy, Mr Swinney would have had the chance to think through some of the obvious questions being asked. It does not, Presiding Officer, inspire confidence to hear legitimate questions being deflected, nor to hear that it will be left to schools and universities to sort out the tricky issues. I would sit down now to give the Cabinet Secretary the chance to give a bit more clarity, but from experience I know that we'll just get more of the same. I'm starting to suspect that the new strategy is just to give as little information as possible so that there's less chance of people pointing out later that things have gone wrong. Presiding Officer, when it comes to education, it's clear that this SNP government will do nothing proactively, and that's why I would urge colleagues across this chamber this evening to continue holding them to account and make sure that they listen to this Parliament and the people of Scotland. Thank you.
That concludes the debate on responding to parliamentary will and calls for clarity in education. And it's time to move on to the next item of business. I was about